go down on the page. You will get to another link that will get you to this.
Did you hear that?
Michael, we're on YouTube and we're
Somebody else
recording.
have the same thing. And there's
I'm gonna make this.
Yeah, do a gallery view. Okay.
that's what should do it. But if you are still engaged in something else, then it won't let you do it.
So if anybody is, from our rabbinic cohort, you can also
Hold on, it says this meeting is being recorded. But everybody's, I wish I knew what the page was. It might be that it's semi-engaged, so try it again.
So welcome everyone.
Yeah, because unfortunately.
Rabbi Haas, can you make Beth Shalom Vero Beach a co-host as well? I'm looking at you, Kermie. Is my audio working?
Talk.
Testing, yes.
You know, Beth Shalom.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone. I am Rabbi Michael Bernholtz from Temple Beth Shalom in Vero Beach, and it is amazing to be able to come together to enjoy Purim in this way. We are spread quite literally far and wide, from Tennessee to Indiana to Massachusetts and Savannah and all over Georgia, and a whole host of us down in the, I would say Sunshine State, but it's raining right now, the Sunshine State of Florida. This is brought to you by a whole collection of rabbis and a cantor who said, let's do something fun with all of our communities together. And so you are about to experience the first ever musings on the Megillah. What we are going to do is you're going to hear some of the chanting and reading of the Megillah. We're going to offer to you some of the Hebrew. And then each of us is the rabbis are going to take turns teaching our way through the Megillah, looking at different pieces as we go in just short little teachings. And we are going to have a chance to really enjoy the Megillah in all of its different facets. There will be moments where you are going to hear the name Haman. I got some booing back here. And so when you hear Haman, there's a few things that you can do if you hear Haman. As you saw, if your chat is up, Rabbi Haas put a boo. You can also use reactions. So if you watch my screen, Cantor, throw up a reaction.
Wait.
I'm not controlling the computer.
I don't know how to boo on this. There's no boo reaction. Here.
So there's a thumbs up. I guess that's as close as I'm going to get. Now I'm crying.
Here, wait,
so you can use the react.
Look at mine. Look at mine, Michael. You'll see a Haman mask.
You can boo in the chat. You can definitely read silently because if we get lots of voices, it gets really, really confusing. And you might hear whoever is speaking to use their grogger. It is truly wonderful that we have this opportunity to be together to enjoy this night of Purim. I'm hoping some of you have some sweet treats and some libations, even as we experience this wonderful day of joy and giving, of gifts and celebration. And so we are going to start off first. I'm going to trade places with our cantor Sarah Keel, as she comes forward to offer the blessings and to get us ready for the Megillah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro Megillah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavotenu v'imotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו והקימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. And do we have our first chanter, our first reader now? Guidon,
Yes.
you're up.
And so we begin. Chapter 1, verse 1. It happened in the days of Ahasuerus that Ahasuerus, aka Achashverosh, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Nubia, in those days when King Ahasuerus occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers, the administration of Persia and Media, the nobles and governors of the provinces in his service. And as he did all of that, his queen, the good Queen Vashti, also gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Bezeta, Harbona, Bigta, Abagta, Zetar, Karkas, Mo, Curly, Larry, Schmendrick, Heckle, Jekyll, Lefty, Righty, and also all the other eunuchs in attendance to King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing a royal diadem and nothing else, to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him.
Okay, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Cantor Keels. It is wonderful to be with you this evening. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what I see. This curriculum comes from Jewish Women International from their 2012 Purim Toolkit. And I specifically chose section 3, which is striving for parity, because what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of the key verses, chapter 1, verses 9 through 12, and look at some of the challenges there may be with some of what Guidon just read. So you see the highlighted sections. I'm just going to focus on those sections. On the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he ordered for Vashti the queen to come before him, as Guidon said, wearing only the royal crown to show the people and the princes her beauty. But Vashti the queen refused. Now, as a child, we all learned that Vashti was the enemy. And I am here to tell you that that's just not correct. So here is a midrash from the Talmud on Megillat Esther. On the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, was his heart therefore not merry with wine until then? Rav said the 7th day was the Sabbath, when Israel eats and drinks. Israel begins with a discourse on the Torah and with the words of praise. But the nations of the world, the idolaters, when they eat and drink, they only begin with words of frivolity. And so it happened at the feast of that wicked one, Ahasuerus, some of his nobles said, the Median women are the most beautiful, and the others said the Persian women are the most beautiful. King Ahasuerus answered them, the vessel that I use is neither Median nor Persian, but Chaldean. Would you like to see her? Rabbi Dov Linzer, who is the director of Chovevei Torah, writes, he implies that the parity that exists between men and women, that is a state of balance in which men and women have equal power or status, may only be possible in situations where men take responsibility for learning to see women as more than objects of sexual gratification. And he says, at heart, we're talking about a blame the victim mentality. He continues, the Talmud acknowledges that men can be sexually aroused by women and is indeed concerned with sexual thoughts and activity outside of marriage. But it does not tell women that men's sexual urges are their responsibility. Rather, both the Talmud and the later codes of Jewish law make that demand of men. He continues, to make this the woman's responsibility is to demand that Jewish women cover their hands and not dry their clothes in public. It is the male gaze, the way men look at women, that needs to be desexualized, not women in public. Jewish tradition teaches that men and women alike should be modest in their dress. But modesty is not defined by or even primarily about how much of one's body is covered. It is about comportment and behavior. And just a little bit of an aside of that from Deborah Rosenblum, JWI's director of programs. She says, in the Midrash, the king refers to his wife as a vessel. From this, we learn that he considers his wife solely as a means of satisfying his needs. He shows a lack of respect for her and, as a result, devalues her as a human being. In a healthy relationship, each partner values and respects the other in all their complexity as a human being. So think about these questions I'm about to ask. We don't have time to talk about them, but think about them as you're going on your way, as you're hearing about all of the amazing teachings that my colleagues are going to share with you. Do you think that Vashti knew what the consequences would be for her if she refused the king? Why would she refuse? What does that say about Vashti's character, which, by the way, we don't ever discuss, and we should? Are we meant to think that if he had not been drunk, the King Ahasuerus we're talking about here, he would not have behaved this way? How does addiction, either to alcohol or something else, affect the dynamics of a relationship, the give and take of power, or the ability to negotiate about how decisions are made and by whom? And lastly, consider Esther's power and status by the end of her story. Try to imagine her marriage to Ahasuerus after another year has gone by. Can you project what their relationship will be like in 7 more years? What might their story look like after a lifetime? In what ways will their marriage need to change in order for us to call it a healthy relationship? And friends, I leave you with this question. The story of Purim, as we read it, is a snapshot of a life. Much like the rest of our Torah, there's so much that we don't see that we have to think about and we have to study and read and understand. So as we look forward these days and in the rest of our lives, let us look at the characters of Queen Esther's story, not just as victims and as heroes, but each of them with their own character and each of them with their own challenges and their own wonderful aspects of their community, of their personality. Thank you.
We have Guidon again.
If you're following along, chapter 2, verse 21. בימים ההם, ומרדכי יושב בשער המלך, קצף בקתן ותרש, 2 סריסי המלך, משומרי הסף, ויבקשו לשלוח יד במלך אחשוורוש. ויוודע הדבר למרדכי, ויגד לאסתר המלכה, ותאמר אסתר למלך בשם מרדכי. ויבוקש הדבר וימצא, ויתעלו שניהם על העץ. וייכתב בספר דברי הימים לפני המלך. פרק שלישי. אחר הדברים האלה גדל המלך אחשוורוש את המן.
Oh.
בואו. בן המדתה האגגי. וינשאהו וישם את כיסו מעל כל השרים אשר איתו. וכל עבדי המלך אשר בשער המלך קוראים ומשתחווים להמן.
No.
כי כן ציווה לו המלך, ומרדכי לא יכרע ולא ישתחווה. ויאמרו עבדי המלך אשר בשער המלך למרדכי, מדוע אתה עובר את מצוות המלך? You know what I mean? What are you doing there? ויהי כאמרם אליו יום ויום, ולא שמע עליהם, ויגידו להמן,
No.
לראות היעמדו דברי מרדכי, כי הגיד להם אשר הוא יהודי. וירא המן
Boo.
כי אין מרדכי קורע ומשתחווה לו, וימלא המן
Boo.
חמה, ויבז בעיניו לשלוח יד למרדכי לבדו, כי הגידו לו את עם מרדכי. ויבקש המן להשמיד את כל היהודים אשר בכל מלכות אחשוורוש עם מרדכי.
Thank you, Rabbi Guidon Isaacs. And now we have a teaching by Rabbi Estelle Mills.
Good evening. I'm Rabbi Estelle Mills. I'm from Congregation Beth Jacob in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Nice to be with you all tonight. I'm centering my teaching on the second and third chapters of the book, in which there's the insert about the two eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, who Mordecai sees or overhears plotting to kill the king, and how that led to the development of anti-Semitism, some say, and how Esther leads that. So the verses from Esther chapter 2 that talk about the situation read as follows. At the time when Mordecai was sitting in the palace gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, became angry and plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. Mordecai learned of it and told it to Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be so, and the two were impaled on stakes. This was recorded in the Book of Annals at the insistence of the king. So very straightforward. Mordecai overhears them, reports it, and they get killed. But there's a lot of different things that develop from that. So I want to share with you some of that. Oops, so I just lost it. Yeah. Okay, so from this, there actually came two different plots that developed. One we learn that these two eunuchs, as we heard, we got cloned. So in the first plot with this whole thing that happened, I'm sorry, my computer's doing weird things on its own. In the first plot, Mordecai is conceived as a hero who saved the king's life. And that's how the Jews wanted this story spun. Then there's a second thing though, and there's lots of different, like any other book, because it's part of the Christian Bible as well, there's several different versions of it. So in a second plot, which throws a little bit of different spin on it, the emphasis on that Mordecai refused to obey the king's command and bow down and pay homage to Haman. And so Haman got mad and created this idea that Mordecai was not loyal to the king. And not just Mordecai, but as we'll see, his entire people. So the irony between these two different interpretations of plot is that one, Mordecai was able to save the king's life because he overheard this plot, but that later, when Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman, now this hero who saved the king's life can be depicted as a villain who is accused of disobeying the king's command, because the king commanded, the part of the king's command was that everyone bow down to Haman, and he could have lost his life for refusing to bow down. So which is it? Is he, as the story says, was he a outsider who was eavesdropping, or was he loyal? So when he refused to bow down, what from some of the other versions, particularly some of the Christian versions, it is said that Haman became very enraged and was actually mystified and asked the other Hebrews why Mordecai, who was successful and in the king's kingdom, would risk his post by refusing to bow down. And the Hebrews explained and used a different term, that Mordecai wasn't a Hebrew, he was a Jew. And they described him in this other version that he was a throwback to another age who refused to embrace Persian society and were waiting for redemption. And as you can see from that translation and understanding of it, that therefore sets in this motion this idea that the Jews are not part of larger society, they're just there, but they're waiting to be part of, of their own world, and they're never going to be part of it. And actually, this is the first time, as we'll see if my computer works, that they use the word ha-Yehudi instead of Hebrews for the Jew. When he refused to bow down in Esther 3, 2, and 6, he uses the word ha-Yehudi, and that he was a Jew rather than a Hebrew. And the book of Esther is the first time ever that our people were known as Jews rather than Hebrews. Mordecai is introduced in this book as ha-Yehudi, the Jew, and it occurs, as we could see if my slides work, in Megillah Esther, the term Yehudi as a Jew, a religious affiliation, not a political one, occurs more times, 6 times, and it's the only time the word ha-Yehudi to describe a Jew appears in our Bible, just in Megillah Esther, and only in the phrase Mordecai, the Jew, which sets up this idea that he's apart and different as a Jew rather than a Hebrew. This is a comparison of this story showing the middle is an addition that was found to be added by the Jews later on to kind of help deflect this idea that the Jews are now seen as a different people. Then we have the Hebrew text, and this is a comparison with the Christian text dealing with this same part. And I'm going through it very quickly, I know. But what is interesting is that Esther does present a unique view towards the phenomenon of anti-Semitism or hatred because of the Jews, because the modern explanation is that that view of hatred comes out of us being self-segregating and that we're distinct from other nations. And that was what Haman was trying to show, that with the idea that Haman didn't bow down because he thought of himself different and a part of a different nation and not loyal to the king. However, when this rewrite was done and this addition added, the object of the Jews to add this is to show that the Jews were loyal to the king by showing that it was Haman who saved the king from being killed, and that it was actually Haman who wanted to be a king, and him and his group were the ones who were not loyal to the king. So the Jews were trying to show that they were loyal, and Haman and his group were not loyal. So with this addition that was added later on, the conclusion that the Jews wanted to add is that, in contrast to the idea that Jews are disloyal to the regime, the book wanted to show that the reverse is correct, and it's the enemies of the Jew who were traitorous to the king in this situation, while the Jews themselves were faithful and devoted. And because they were, that's why Haman disliked them. And looking then how it relates to anti-Semitism quickly, back in 2006, the Israeli journalist Amos Alon wrote that the Holocaust was seen as simply the culmination of a long, unbroken line of anti-Semitism from Pharaoh to Nebuchadnezzar to Hitler to Arafat. But when we look at the Hebrew Bible, there is no anti-Semitism in our Bible. Pharaoh discriminated against all foreigners. The Bible never portrays Nebuchadnezzar as an anti-Semite, but as we can see in this quote, that it was God that caused the temple to be destroyed. From Jeremiah, the quote that it was God who did this. In some works, it says that because only in the book of Esther is the only time in the Bible we find what would be the precursor of today's anti-Semitism, and it stems from the fact that Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman in chapter 3, and explains, and for the first time calls himself Ha-Yehudi, the Jew, implying that his reason was because of being a Jew, relating it then to being a religion and being a different people. And we see this in Esther 3:8, that there's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples who do not obey the king's law, and it is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. And so on the political level, Haman was the first to articulate the idea of due loyalty among the Jews, and argued that the Jews' allegiance to their own laws caused them to be disloyal to the laws of the state. Very quickly, just how they related to going back, how Mordecai turning in these people, which would have showed he was loyal to the king, was twisted around and retweaked to show that because he called himself a Jew for the first time with that word, that they Jews were actually not loyal to the state. And that's been used throughout time as a reason why people dislike the Jews. And I'll stop there.
Unmute myself. Okay, thank you, Rabbi Mills. And now we have Rabbi Bruce Benson reading part of chapter 4 for us.
And I am going to do a share screen so that you can see. Hopefully you can all see this. And we are in chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. Vayomer Mordechai lehashiv el Esther al tidami v'nafshech lehimalech beit hamelech mikol haYehudim ki im hachareish tacharishi ba'et hazot Reva v'hatzala yamod laYehudim mimakom acher ve'et uvet habich tovedu umi yodea im le'et kazot higat Lamalachut vatomer Esther lehashiv el Mordechai lech kenos et kol haYehudim הנמצאים בשושן, ותשומעו עלי, ואל תאכלו ואל תשתו 3 ימים לילה ויום. גם אני ונערותי עצום כן, ובכן אבוא אל המלך אשר לא חדת, וכאשר עבדתי, ויעבור מרדכי, ויעש ככל אשר ציוותה עליו Esther.
Thank you, Rabbi Bruce Benson. And now we have a teaching by Rabbi Michael Bernholtz from Temple Beth Shalom.
Uh-oh, our host has disabled screen sharing?
I think that we're not the host. That would be Rabbi Robert Haas.
You have screen sharing.
It says host has disabled screen sharing.
Can you make Rabbi Michael be a co-host,
yes,
please?
Yes, Rabbi Michael B. needs to be the co-host as well. Oh, Rabbi Rob Haas. Ta-da! So it is wonderful to be with everyone on this night of Purim, and I am talking about fasting, which I feel like I should talk about really quickly for the sake of this teachings, these musings on the Megillah. As I mentioned, fasting, we just heard these instructions, because of course Haman, has declared that the people of Israel, that the Jews that are in Persia, they should be murdered on the 13th day of Adar. Ahasuerus has gone along with this plan. He gets a hearty bribe, and Mordecai hears about this. He sits at the gates, and he is in sackcloth and ashes. He is in mourning. Esther says, "What's going on?" And he explains this to her. She says, "Well, I can't really do anything because you're not allowed to go before the king unless you get summoned, and I haven't been summoned in quite a while." So Mordecai says in this moment, which is a huge moment in the book of Esther in Jewish life, don't think for 1 second because you're hiding up in the castle that you are going to be saved and rescued from this mess. It's going to find you too. And don't worry, if you don't step forward, O Esther, somebody will to rescue the people of Israel. And we don't exactly know what that other person might be, but Esther says, fine. What I need everybody to do is to fast for 3 days, and then I'm going to go to Ahasuerus, and we're going to figure this all out. So here we have, and this is the origins of Ta'anit Esther, the fast of Esther, which ironically is, so daytime fast, 13th day of Adar. It's a minor fast. You are allowed to bathe. You are allowed to work. It's just this day before. Now, there are some weird twists that go as you start talking about the fast of Esther and Esther fasting. So here is the quote. And if you look, she says, "Go assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or nights. I and my maidens will observe the same fast, and I shall go to the king. Though it is contrary to law, and if I am to perish, if I am to be lost, then I will be lost." So first of all, it's not on the 13th day of Adar. That is incredible because we all do Ta'anit Esther on the 13th day of Adar. In fact, it is the 13th, 14th, and 15th day of the month of Nisan. What holiday falls on the 15th day of Nisan? Passover. And so she says fast, and Mordecai says, wait, you can't do that, that's Passover. And she says, that's a great retort that we find in Midrash, what's the point of Passover? If we all die, we are not going to celebrate Passover anyway, so fast, that's what's really important. It's a rather incredible and beautiful piece of midrash. It's an incredible thing to be thinking about. So often in Torah, we see when it talks about the people of Israel, they're shrine gevalt because they're in the wilderness. And what use do we have of going forward? We might as well die in the wilderness. Oh, I want this. Oh, I want that. We can't have that. We might as well die. Here you get that same cry, that same protest, but instead of pushing back against God, here you have, this is a way to lift up the people of Israel. We have this where it's Esther and her people, but she's really asking all of the people to fast. The people of Israel are fasting. Are they fasting because they're having solidarity with Esther as she prepares to go to Ahasuerus and to confront Haman? There is this act of fasting that all of them are proceeding in order to show support for their leader. Esther is taking the lead. She is giving this instruction. We even see right there in the Hebrew that that Mordecai says, I'm going to follow through what she says. There's the incredible power of collective action. That if we all do something, even if we are on the outskirts of the impact of it, if we all join together to do collective action, it becomes something greater than the sum of its parts. And this is a powerful act of collective action where everybody is coming together to take on this fast, to, even though they're not going to have to go to Ahasuerus, even though they're not going to have to confront Haman, but by doing this and showing the sign that the whole Jewish community is together, like in Passover, where they're all paint the doorposts of their house with the blood of the lamb, you get this sense that this is a whole community working together. Think about fasting for a moment. What is our basic story of all of our holidays? We survived, they tried to kill us. We survived, let's eat. Here we're talking about fasting. Fasting is such a powerful ritual act because it gets us so far out of our routine. We eat every day. This act of really setting aside food and setting aside drink and moving through time and space differently, it impacts us on our body, it impacts us outside. There's also this outward sign. If all of the people of Israel that are living in Persia all stop eating, you got to figure everybody else around them is saying, wait, what's going on? Why are they having these acts of fasting and these acts of mourning? It becomes an outward sign. It's an inward sign to all of them that we've got to do something. And it's an outward sign to all of those around. How many of us, I'll use another Passover example, how many of us have been sitting at lunch and you take out your matzah because it's Passover and someone says, what are you eating? And then you have to tell them the whole Passover story. And it's also a beautiful reminder of how to take care of our body. We see this in Yom Kippur, where it says, the fast I'm looking for isn't just that you withhold food from your body and that you don't eat, but it becomes something that's transformational to how you think and how you move. How do you value not just the food, but how do you, as you're eating, take care of the world around you? You see across our tradition a number of different types of fasts. There's atonement of sin. That's on Yom Kippur. There's commemorative fast. This is on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, where we don't eat for that 25-hour period because we are in that sense of mourning and loss. There's supplication in support of crisis, and this is the fast of Esther. I also think, and we'll see in just a moment, that it's kind of commemorative gratitude as well. Some of this is that there are times and moments where the people of Israel face a challenge, and they do a communal fast to say, we know there's brokenness in the world. God, we need some help to come from something beyond ourselves to fix this. We also have the fast of Esther, is also an act of gratitude as well. We survived. They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. But before we eat, stop, take some time to not eat and not drink, and think about the meaning of celebration and party and sweetness and gifts. So one of the questions is, why did this get onto the 13th day of Adar? And there's all kinds of discussions about this. Some think it's to counterbalance. It's on the day before Purim in order to counterbalance the merrymaking. There's also that the people of Israel, the Jews of Persia, the 13th day of Adar is when they had to rise up to protect themselves. Cantor Keel is in the back doing this because they had to fight against the forces that Haman had set loose, on the people. They didn't even have time to eat. And so by fasting, we are acknowledging this moment where the people of Israel had to resort to physical violence in order to protect themselves to such a degree that they didn't get to eat or drink that day. There is also, I will tell you, a celebration called Nicanor Day that happened to fall on the 13th day of Adar. It has to do with Hanukkah, and the rabbis who are putting the Feast of Esther, the story of Purim in place, were not big fans of the Hasmoneans, didn't really like this war with the Syrian Greeks, and they were looking for something to put instead of Nicanor Day, which is a day of feast and celebration. And so if the Hasmoneans said, have a day of feasting and celebration, the rabbis declared, oh, let's have a fast for Esther. So I offer to you this night, as we are celebrating Purim, as we get to eat some of our tasty treats, and some of us fasted, that's a question. Do we fast on this 13th day of Adar? Do we remember this moment where Esther said, there is a challenge in the world, I need the whole Jewish community to get behind me, not just with thoughts and prayers, but with real action to withhold from themselves for a period of time so that I can be focused and I can feel your Ruach and Koach. Or, if we don't fast, what can we do to note this day of the fast of Esther? Not just to ignore it, not just to say it's not important, but to feel some kavod, to feel the weight and the honor and respect of this day, of what Esther did and Mordecai did, what the Jews of that era faced and how they handled it. Separate question as we think about that, of what we're going to do on that 13th day of Adar, are we supposed to feel on that day like we're Esther, preparing for that feast and preparing, and all of us have had those moments where we have confronted a challenging person or a challenging situation. Are we supposed to put ourselves in Esther's shoes, thinking about what it was like to get ready to confront the situation with Ahasuerus, who she's not sure how she's going to be treated, how she's going to face Haman, who wants to kill all of her people? Or, and it might be more of an and, are we supposed to be like the people of Israel? Are we supposed to be like the Jews in that time as they're sitting there watching what's happening, trying to get news of what's happening in the castle, in the palace, and they're considering all of the threats and the challenges that are in their midst? We should be thinking about what are the challenges in our midst, and are we getting ourselves physically and spiritually ready to face them? And with that, I say Chag Purim Sameach. I hope all of us have a happy Purim, and that we get to enjoy these musings of the Megillah. The fast of Esther is over, and so we have a chance to celebrate and have sweetness and drink and partying as we continue with our program.
Thank you, Rabbi Michael Bernholtz. And now we have some of Chapter 5 by Rabbi Bruce Benson.
Yes, we do. And I'm going to try something a little tad different, which will be interesting, well, at least for me. And so, when they talk about kosher style, it means in the style of kosher, but not strict to it. And I'm going to try doing something that, from hearing all of my colleagues speak, I thought sounds like an interesting attempt. So you'll know. Trust me, you'll know. I don't even know. Vayomer HaMelech leEsther b'mishtei hayayin ma sha'elatech vayinatan lach uma bakashatech ad chatzei hamalachut v'teas v'ta'an Esther v'tomar she'elati uvakshati. אם מצאתי חן בעיני המלך, ואם על המלך טוב לתת את שאלתי ולעשות את בקשתי, יבוא המלך והמן. Oh, geez, that was pretty weak. But there are 7 in this reading, so you've got plenty of time to work up to it. El hamishte asher e'ezeh lahem, umachar e'ezeh kidva no halech. That day Haman went out happy and lighthearted, but when Haman, oh, it's going to be like that, is it? So Mordecai in the palace gate, and Mordecai did not rise or even stir on his account. Haman was filled with rage at him. Nevertheless, Haman controlled himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh, and Haman told them about his great wealth and his many sons, and all about how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the officials and the king's courtiers. What is more, said Haman. Wow. Boo, 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 boo. Queen Esther gave a feast, and besides the king, she did not have anyone but me. And tomorrow, too, I am invited by her along with the king. B'chol zeh einenu shover li b'chol eit asher ani ro'eh et Mordechai HaYehudi. That was the HaYehudi that Rabbi Esther was talking about. Yoshev b'sha'ar HaMelech v'tomer lo Zeresh ishto v'chol ohavav ya'asu eitz gavoa 50 amah uvaboker emor lamelech vayitlu et Mordechai alav uvo im hamelech el hamishte samayach vayitav hadavar lifnei Haman. Vayas ha'etz.
Thank you, Rabbi Bruce Benson. And now we have another wonderful member of the HUC class of 2017, Rabbi Guidon Isaacs.
All right, we need Rabbi Bruce, if you can stop sharing your screen. There we go. Thank you. I hope our friends in Florida appreciate this little tribute, and any other beach-dwelling areas there. Not too many sharks here in suburban Illinois or Indiana, but hats off to you. So I want to talk, as my my little piece here was entitled Sympathy for the Devil. So I want to start with just first kind of straight reading and pointing out how we typically see Haman, and then read this some of what we already had Rabbi Bruce read, which really, again, I'll stop with the hat comments, but hats off to you for that English chanting. That was enjoyable and quite a feat as well. So we heard pieces of it in English, but I want to just go over what we heard chanted and read it, as I said, through kind of the traditional lens before going into looking at Haman for what we can, as a human character, and what we can learn from him. So, as we just read, Haman, as we know, just had that tete-a-tete. He was invited to the party with just the king and Esther. So really, he couldn't be in a higher place, in a higher position, in a more powerful role. What a symbol of the world of power there, the queen, the king, and him. So it's no wonder in verse 9, we see that Haman went out happy and lighthearted. But it doesn't last long. When Haman saw Mordecai in the palace gate and Mordecai doesn't rise, he's filled with rage. But he controls himself and he goes home and sends for, this says friends, but really his loved ones and his wife Zeresh. So beloved friends. Ahav, ahava, that word in Hebrew may be familiar to many of you as the word for love. He calls them, and he tells them about his great wealth and his many sons, his accomplishments, and not only that, the height of his accomplishments, that Queen Esther gave this feast, and it was just him and Achashverosh there. And then but he acknowledges it all means nothing when he sees Mordecai. So our standard view is Haman as this mustache-twirling villain, powerful, power-hungry, and insecure, and yet petty and insecure at the same time. So we tend to delight in his suffering and his comeuppance. Right? He leaves this party full of joy, and at the height of his power, and just the mere sight of Mordecai is enough to make all of that go away. And we think, what a chump, right? What a schmuck. And so then he does what's reasonable. He calls these people to see him, but really, they're just an audience to feed his ego. He brags and he boasts, but then he admits that it all means nothing as long as he sees Mordecai. And it's at that point that he takes Zeresh's advice. I realize the one piece we didn't look at is Zeresh, his wife, says, he bothers you so much, let's have him killed. Put a stake up and have him impaled on it. So we already can see, we know where this is going, and we relish the foreshadowing and what will ultimately happen. But I want to say, what if? Right? What if we look at Haman as human? And for that, and I'm sure I'll go back to it more than once, but this one line, just every time I read it's so relatable and it breaks my heart, right? Because, okay, we could read him as the villain and everything else, but let's imagine this is a friend or one of us, right? How relatable is this in the midst of someone who has everything, right? But he says, all of this means nothing every time I see Mordecai sitting on the palace gate. So it all goes away, right? So I want to look at Haman through and relate to him through our own lives, and simply is not that mustache-twirling villain, but another human being, and maybe even as ourselves, to see what we can learn from him. Because I think as much as the Megillah is in caricature, in broad comedy, this little piece, I think, is so true to life. So if we look at verse 9, here is someone who has everything, right? He leaves out happy and lighthearted. It's not enough that he's just happy. Right? He's really on cloud 9. But all it takes is that one view, that one moment that he sees Mordecai in the palace gate, and it all goes away. And here, if we think about what is so prevalent today, right? Think of gratitude practices, right? The road that we know towards a happier life. How often we tend to focus on, even in the midst of our joy, that one thing that is going wrong, right? I think of sage advice that a friend gave to me before my wedding, said, something will always go wrong at your wedding. Now, this is still a long time ago, but just let it alone. No one's going to notice it, and it doesn't matter, right? But in that little piece of advice was that truth of how often the little thing that goes wrong is where we put all our energy, and that's exactly what Haman does. He's riding high, and yet one view of Mordecai, and it's all gone. Now, what's interesting is that he almost is able to grow and progress, right? It's as if there's one step forward, two steps back. Because, again, looking at the text, you can see that he's filled with rage, right, at the end of verse 9. But this time, he doesn't blow up. He controls himself. In Hebrew, vayitapek, he holds it all in. He actually has the wisdom not to lose it there and then. And not only that, but he actually he goes to surround himself with loved ones, with love of friends and wife. And that would have been perfect. But what does he do? And here I want to say, not just because Haman is evil, but I think this we can all relate to as well. We get in this moment of rage, and instead of being present and simply being nourished by the people around us, right, we vent. And that's what he does. He boasts. First he boasts, right? He lists off all that he has, as if that's going to make it all better somehow. That's going to fill in this hole. And right there, that one step forward, but two steps back. Surrounded by people he loves, has the solution, but instead he boasts and brags. But then he builds to what has just happened, right? In verse 12, in his bragging, he actually gets to a real accomplishment, something that is unprecedented in his career, right? He has reached this height. What is more, Queen Esther had just me and Achashverosh. So he almost manages to console himself. But then, right, he comes back down. And here, I would say, is not just the two steps backward again, right? He erases it all by seeing Mordecai. But there's actually an opportunity here. There's a moment of vulnerability by Haman, where he recognizes that all he needs to do is see Mordecai, and it all goes away. Right? He actually names the problem. He's on to something, right? And if it had stopped there, all would have gone so differently. And I'm going to go back to the road not taken. But let me point out what he does and what also often all of us do, right? We focus on that one problem, right? By listening to Zeresh, she says, well, Mordecai's your problem, so kill him. Get rid of it, right? That's your solution. And so the teaching, the wisdom of the book of Esther for us here is in that road not taken, right? Because that's what Haman does. He goes to try and blot out Mordecai. We all know how it turns out. But the truth is that we all can relate. We all know that when we focus on that one thing, or that one thing that is missing, that is keeping the whole picture from being perfect, and try and blot that out, it always fails. Because that one thing isn't really about that one thing, right? So here it's about Mordechai and it's not about Mordechai. Because if it weren't Mordechai, we can see from who Haman is, and we know from as human beings that what it's really about is you can never have it all. There's always going to be that one thing missing. And Haman's fatal flaw is his inability to understand that, his lack of emotional intelligence, we could say, to recognize that what Mordechai represents is that there will always be something missing. There will always be a source of pain for any one of us. There'll always be struggle. And along the way, he gives us the path to dealing with it, right? That surrounding ourselves with loved ones, creating meaningful relationships, and being present to them and sharing with them and sharing that struggle. And ultimately, I think the most powerful piece here is what the road not taken for Haman is one of peace and acceptance. That if he had found a way to not just hold back his rage, but make peace, and accept that this person was always going to be around, or if it wasn't Mordechai, it would be something else, that he would have found a way to successfully end this story. But we all know that within each one of us, there is a Haman, right? If we are each going to see ourselves as a character and learn the message of any given story from Tanakh by seeing ourselves in those characters, we also have to see ourselves in him. And in doing that, learn what we can from that fatal flaw and do differently and do better in our lives so that we don't end up, of course, God forbid, hanging from the gallows, but metaphorically speaking, right, hanging in a way that deprives us of joy and meaning in life, as he does. So thank you.
Are we unmuted? Yeah. Thank you to Rabbi Guidon Isaacs. And now a little bit of Megillah. Can you hear? Let's put this over here. Can you hear me now? Go ahead. והמלך שב בגינת הביתן אל בית משתי היין והמן נפל על מיטה אשר סר עליה ויאמר המלך הגם לכבוש את המלכה מבבית הדבר יצא מפי המלך ובני המן חפו ויאמר חרבונה אחר מן הסריסים לפני המלך גם מן העץ אשר שם Haman. Yeah, that's the longest trope in the Megillah. למרדכי אשר דיבר טוב על המלך עמד בבית המן גבוה 50 אמה. ויאמר המלך תלו עליו ויתלו את המן על העץ אשר הכין למרדכי וחמת המלך שכחה. ביי ביי. פתשגן הכתב לתן דת בכל מדינה ומדינה
גלוי לכל העמים, ולהיות היהודים עתידים ליום הזה, להינקם מאויביהם. והרצים רוכבי האפש, הרכש, החשטרנים, יצאו מבוהלים ובטחופים בדבר המלך, והדת ניתנה בשושן המירה, ומרדכי יצא מלפני המלך, בלבוש מלכות ותכלת וחור, ועטרת זהב ודודולם, ותחרית בוז וארגמן, ושושן זולה ושמחה. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר. ובכל מדינה ומדינה, ובכל עיר ועיר, מקום אשר דבר המלך ודתו מגיע. ושמחה וששון ליהודים, משווים טוב ורבים. מעמי הארץ מתייהדים, כי נפל פחד היהודים עליהם. ובשניהם 10 חודש וחודש אדר, ו13 יום ובו, אשר הגיע דבר המלך, ודתו לעשות ביום.
Andrew, lift the scroll up a little bit into the center. Awesome.
Where was I? Messed me up.
You were over a column.
Over a column. You're right, I was. אשר סיפרו אויבי היהודים לשלוט בהם ונהפכו, אשר ישלטו היהודים המה ושונאיהם, נכלו היהודים ביריהם בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש לשלוח יחם במבקשי רעתם, וישלומה בפניהם, כי נפל פחדם על כל העמים. וכל שרי המדינות, והחשדרפנים, והפחות, ועושי המלכה אשר למלך, מנשאים את היהודים. Had a little bit of bourbon earlier. ועושי המלכה כי נפל פחד מרדכי עליהם, כי גדול מרדכי בבית המלך, וישמעו הולך בכל המדינות, כי איש מרדכי הולך וגדול. Mordecai's the big man on campus now. ויקחו היהודים בכל אויביהם. מכת חרב והרב ואבדם. That means they killed everyone. וייסעו בשונאיהם כרצונם, ובשושן הבירה הרגו היהודים ואבד 500 איש. Yeah, they killed someone's sons. You can guess who. Let's see who they killed. Vet person vet telefon vet safte vet porat vet talia vet vet pamat vet vet vazata. Aseret b'nei Haman. Now you know whose sons they are. Ben Handata Zoreh HaYehudim Hargu Ubavizah Lo Shalchu Et Yadam. And now presenting Rabbi Robert Haas.
Good evening, everyone. I think like many of you, you grew up with some of the same sayings that my parents taught me. If you sit in front of the TV too long, you're going to go blind, right? If you don't study hard, you'll never get a good job. If you don't eat your spinach, you're never going to be strong. And you'll never find anyone to marry you. You'll never have kids, and you'll probably never have anyone to ever love you for the entirety of your entire life. But I'm sure we all had the exact same sayings and probably the same therapy sessions as well. For me, when I look at this portion, especially after what we just read, I think to myself, is this reality or is this something different? It doesn't seem realistic to me, especially right now. We just read that Mordecai is feared. We've been scared about all of the Jewish people. And now what does Mordecai and the people do? The Jews go out and they kill everyone. They find anybody they don't like and they kill them. Hooray, success. In fact, we're going to need more days to kill people. Let's go to the king and request more days to kill people. Hooray for us. So whereas many people may say, wow, this is a story about the Jewish people in ancient times, in truth, I look at it as something just a little different, as many others do, and that is one of the greatest farces in Jewish history, if not the greatest of all. Because quite frankly, when you look at this, all of the characters for the most part are one-dimensional. Haman is the bad guy, Mordecai the Hebrew, the hero, Esther, sort of a Hebrew and sort of a hero, Ahasuerus is the fool, and everybody is just doing what seemingly every one-dimensional character does. In fact, they don't even seem that pious. We see Ahasuerus, who has a year-long party instead of running his kingdom. Can you imagine any of our political leaders partying all the time instead of running the country? That would never happen in America or Israel or anywhere else. Can you imagine having a year-long beauty contest to find your spouse and the future queen of the empire? This does not make sense. This is an implausible story, and yet somehow it made it into the Bible. There were other books that were around at the same time when the rabbis decided which books were going in the Bible. And except for maybe Song of Songs, this is the strangest one to get in. There is no God in this book. It doesn't mention God. It doesn't even refer to God. We see something very strange going on here. And what we see is imaginative storytelling. We see burlesque almost. We see a secular book that has a lot of meaning, but we can't figure out what the meaning is because it doesn't make sense. Is the meaning we should go and kill all of our enemies? Obviously not. What then do we see from this book itself? First of all, we see the first post-Torah festival. It's a way of saying, hey, you don't have to be just a holiday in the Torah to be a big event and celebrate. We see that the people themselves, the Jewish people, probably loved this holiday so much that they almost made the rabbis keep it, because who knows how many of them really wanted to keep this comic book, carnival, beauty pageant, strange fiction going. What we see here is a book unlike any other book, because it teaches us something a little stranger than everything else. It teaches us that we can celebrate in the most difficult of times. It teaches us to laugh at ourselves and not to take everything so seriously, because if you hadn't noticed, there are a lot of serious holidays in Judaism, and we probably need some fun holidays as well. That's probably why Hanukkah has become so much more fun in recent years, because we need a little bit. This holiday itself is the farce of all farces. Yet even though it is a farce, what do we know? We know we can learn from the farce. We learn that we as a people will thrive and survive, and that we need to do more than just have depressing holidays and moments where we look at ourselves and all the difficult times we've had. That would make Hanukkah and every other holiday stale. What we see is the need to celebrate and to find ways to evolve throughout the ages. And Purim is a great example, because not only is Purim this holiday that suggests, hey, we can have more holidays than just what are in the Torah, it is a holiday for everybody in every season. Because as the years come and go, people can celebrate Purim in their own way. For instance, we are celebrating it virtually, which is being done for the first time in almost 1,000 years. We see that the Purim spiel evolved from the revelry that surrounded the holiday, and that Purim spiels now match what is going on in every age. The Purim spiel in many respects is almost Saturday Night Live for many people, reflecting what's going on in our world in a fun and imaginative way. The Purim celebration became a time where the students could get up and make fun of their teachers in the seminary. I know the first time that happened in my seminary, I was shocked when one of our professors got up and made fun of everybody. And quite frankly, if you were not made fun of, you were not anybody. So we're all excited as students if we ever got made fun of. Nobody ever made fun of Michael Bernholtz, however, because he is just too amazing and awesome and really quite a mensch and superior human being. When we look at Purim, we say to ourselves, let us bring people together to celebrate. It is a holiday where the rabbis, the sages, the leaders didn't lead. It was usually the students or the artisans or the actors or the people who didn't have money who came up with these crazy things that they felt they were okay to do, but the elite didn't always feel comfortable doing. And not only that, we could make fun of the elite and everybody was okay with it. Men could dress in drag despite the fact that there is a prohibition that says you can't do that. When the 19th century came around, we became more and more educated. We added klezmer bands and all of these new things, almost a Hanukkah-esque today type thing where it became the center for many people of the year. What we see from Purim is the fact that we can look at our difficult times and not just say we overcame and let's eat. We can say, you know what, let's revel in the success we're having. Let's look back and make fun of ourselves. How many of us have seen jokes about terrible times in our history in ways that make people feel uncomfortable? How many of us felt uncomfortable seeing the producers on TV or in the movie theaters for the first time? And I was just a little kid. What we see from this holiday and from the outrageousness of every aspect of it, from the Persian court to the drinking parties, to Esther's relationship with Mordecai, and everybody knows Mordecai is a Jew, and everybody knows that Esther is his niece, but yet somehow they don't know she's Jewish. And how Haman, who is this overtly bad guy, although he does maybe have a moment of good in there, but not really. He's not a Darth Vader. He is an emperor, only bad. There is no real beyond that, I think. What we see is the rabbis kept this book in because it brought us back down to earth. It kept our religion from being one too high and mighty, one too worrisome about all of our failings, and one to say, hey, let us enjoy. And not only that, Purim has done something more amazing than we can even imagine, because many people remember that Purim is one of the first times where we can laugh at ourselves in Jewish history. But a lot of people direct our attention to Purim and the Purim spiel as the first time we really say pure humor in our world. That directly led to the Yiddish scholars and writers in Russia and Prussia and Ukraine, that led to Yiddish theater, that led to what we would call Jewish comedy, that then really led to what we call American comedy, which is so based on Yiddish musicals, so based on vaudeville, which is based on what happened in Russia, which is really has its origins in the Purim spiel. In many respects, the comedy we see around the world, whether people acknowledge it or not, are based upon least in some way, the Purim spiels and the fun we are having today. I can't forget the first time I went to a real Purim spiel, because Purim was always a kid's holiday when I was growing up. I'm in rabbinical school, and we're sitting there listening to the Megillah being read, and a student next to me passes a flask to me. And I'm thinking, I can't drink this in front of the professors. Are you crazy? Then, of course, when my eyes open and I look around the room, I realize all of the professors are passing the flask to each other as well. What we see is something truly amazing that helps make the Bible what it is today. It teaches us a lesson about how we can overcome things, but by making it a ridiculous book in every way, we can look at it as pure comedy. We can look at it as a way to say we can be more than what we think we are. And many people say this is a satire, as is so often used. Well, the answer is, I don't think it's a satire. It is a complete farce. The only thing maybe compared to it would be burlesque. And so I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, here as we celebrate Purim in the way it was meant to be celebrated. Fun, exciting, laughing at ourselves, understanding that we have difficult times, but we as a people more than anybody else have said, we need to be able to laugh and celebrate, not just mourn at the terrible times. Sure, it's okay to overcome, and we need to overcome, but what is Judaism without the celebration? What is Judaism without the revelry? What is Judaism without what we're doing tonight? So, Mazel Tov for all of us as we are continuing this great tradition of revelry, of the farce, and may we all say boo to Haman one more time. Amen.
Oh,
Thank you, Kermit the Frog, aka Rabbi Robert Haas. And now we present Adina, all the way from Indiana.
Hi, it's nice to be here. I will be reading chapter 9, verses 17 through 23. In Hebrew, I was not asked to share the script, so I hope it's okay. ביום 13 לחודש אדר, ונוח ב14 בו, ועשה אותו יום משתה ושמחה. והיהודים אשר בשושן נקהלו ב13 בו וב14 בו, ונוח ב15 בו. ועשה אותו יום משתה ושמחה. על כן היהודים הפרזים היושבים בערי הפרזות, עושים את יום 14 לחודש אדר, שמחה ומשתה ויום טוב ומשלוח מנות איש לרעהו. ויכתוב מרדכי את הדברים האלה, וישלח ספרים אל כל היהודים אשר בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש, הקרובים והרחוקים, לקיים עליהם להיות עושים את יום 14 לחודש אדר, ואת יום 15 בו בכל שנה ושנה. כימים אשר נחו בהם היהודים מאויביהם, והחודש אשר נהפך להם מיגון לשמחה, ומאבל ליום טוב, לעשות אותם ימי משתה ושמחה, ומשלוח מנות איש לרעהו ומתנות לאביונים. וקיבל היהודים את אשר החלו לעשות, ואת אשר כתב מרדכי עליהם.
Thank you, Adina. And now we have, all the way from Ormond Beach, Rabbi Courtney Berman.
Thank you. And thank you, Adina, for reading so beautifully what she just read. I'm going to share some of the English from that as well. So in chapter 9, which is what Adina was just reading, we actually get some of the reason why we celebrate this holiday. And Rabbi Haas just talked so wonderfully as well about some of why we celebrate. So I'm going to be talking about a different aspect of why we celebrate Purim. And that is another deeply held Jewish value, another deeply held Jewish value is being together as a people and being one community. And one of the stories that we tell over and over again to support that value is Sinai. So how does Purim link to Sinai? You're about to find out. To sum up this Esther 9 a little, we of course have heard a lot of the story at this point, and then going on toward the middle, that is why village Jews who live in unwalled towns observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and make it a day of merrymaking and feasting, and as a holiday and an occasion for sending gifts to one another. And it goes on a little more, the same days on which the Jews enjoyed relief from their foes, in the same month which had been transformed for them from one of grief and mourning to one of festive joy. They were to observe them as days of feasting and merrymaking and as an occasion for sending gifts. The Jews accordingly assumed as an obligation that which they had begun to practice and which Mordecai prescribed for them. So there's this mention of how our people took this holiday on as an obligation. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded, with the promulgation of this decree, let the evil plot which he devised against the Jews recoil on his own head. So they impaled him and his sons on the stake. For that reason, these days were named Purim after Pur. In view then of all the instructions in the said letter and of what they had experienced in that manner and what had befallen them, the Jews undertook and irrevocably obligated themselves and their descendants and all who might join them to observe these 2 days in the manner prescribed and at the proper time each year. So I mentioned we're going to recall both our peoplehood and Sinai. And of course, the story of Sinai is one of the ones that we tell over and over again throughout our year in different ways. We, of course, mark it more on Shavuot, the holiday where that is what we do on Shavuot. And yet we also bring up this story of Sinai at other points in the Jewish year, at Reform congregations, reading Parashat Nitzavim on Yom Kippur, to remind us that we all stood together at Sinai, Jews past, present, and future, and now hopefully you'll think about it on Purim as well. And the idea of Sinai and what you have here in chapter 9 of the Megillah, the Jews undertook and irrevocably obligated themselves. There's this sense that we as a people all accepted the Torah with its obligations. And of course, obligations now are things that as Reform Jews or as liberal Jews, we might understand obligation differently. But no matter how we see these obligations, we see ourselves as being bound by a tradition and obligated to grapple with that tradition and what that means. And Sinai, of course, is a reminder that we have this relationship with this text and with this tradition, and that we're still obligated to grapple with it. And it's also a reminder of our unity, and that we all are together in this. And those are some of the foundational values of our Judaism. So Purim then, aside from being this fun holiday to celebrate joy, which that's a very important thing, but also it gets at that deep Jewish value of togetherness and remembering that we all stood at Sinai together. So I am going to share another text with you. And that's the text that binds Purim to this Sinai story. In the Talmud, in Tractate Shabbat, we read about this view that Purim is like another Sinai, but that it's even more important since our people got the chance to take on the commandments of their own free will, as we just read in chapter 9 of Esther. So the Gemara cites additional homiletic interpretations on the topic of the revelation at Sinai. The Torah says, "And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the lowermost part of the mount." Rabbi Avdimi Bar Chama Bar Chasa said, the Jewish people actually stood beneath the mountain, and the verse teaches that the Holy One, blessed be God, overturned the mountain above the Jews like a tub and said to them, "If you accept the Torah, excellent, and if not, there will be your burial." Rav Ahar Bar Yaakov said, from here, there's a substantial caveat to the obligation to fulfill the Torah. The Jewish people can claim that they were coerced into accepting the Torah, and it is therefore not binding. Rava said, even so, they again accepted it willingly in the time of Ahasuerus, as it is written, "The Jews ordained and took upon them and upon their seed and upon all such as joined themselves onto them." And he taught the Jews ordained what they had already taken upon themselves through coercion at Sinai. So whether we want to see our people as ever being coerced or not, there's this sense in our Purim story that we're taking on the obligation of our own free will. And this idea that that Purim was a Sinai moment is a compelling one. The idea here, I mentioned we weren't coerced with Purim. And I think the important lesson here for us is partly that has to do with our understanding of our relationship with God, and that relationship with God and with God's Torah is one that's constantly evolving, including our relationship with God. This can be a reminder that those things grow and evolve over time. As we move through history, it can change. So as we move through history, of course, in some ways, we're further and further removed from this Sinai moment, right? We know that this happened so far in the past, and that might make us feel further removed. And yet, each year in our Jewish year, we return to this moment ritually again and again. And that serves as a reminder of the importance of the story and the importance of the obligations that we took on at Sinai. But I also think it does serve as an important reminder of that can evolve and change. So calling Purim another Sinai moment has that added benefit. And I just want to go into one more piece as I close, and that's, I was recently reading this book, Inscribed Encounters with the Ten Commandments. And that first commandment, I am Adonai your God, which helps us sort of recall that Sinai moment. There's a lovely chapter in this book by Rabbi Joshua Feigelson, and he wrote about how that commandment, that statement, is actually something that's telling us that we are embarking on this important sacred relationship and conversation with God, and that a conversation is something that goes two ways. And each partner in a conversation respects one another and trusts each other. And that the conversation, when you're having a real conversation, a meaningful conversation, it transforms both parties. Both parties in a conversation, in a good conversation, in a real conversation, come out different than they were before. So the idea that we stood at Sinai and accepted not just the Torah, but a relationship is an important one to remember. And so to remember it on this day where we celebrate joy, can just serve to remind us what a gift we've been given in having this relationship with God and with the Torah and with every single other person, every part of the Jewish family that also stood at Sinai. All Jews are members of the Jewish family, past, present, future. We are all linked together in that story. We are all linked together as we celebrate in joy this holiday of Purim. And I hope that this Purim, you too feel the importance of sustaining the sacred partnership in conversation with God and with each other. And we'll continue with a few more verses from the Megillah.
Thank you. Now we have Adina with chapter 10.
וישם המלך אחשוורוש מס על הארץ ויהיה הים, וכל מעשה תוקפו וגבורתו ופרשת גדולת מרדכי אשר גידלו המלך, הלא הם כתובים על ספר דברי הימים למלכי מדי ופרס. כי מרדכי היהודי משנה למלך אחשוורוש, וגדול ליהודים, ורצוי לרוב אחיו דורש טוב לעמו, ודובר שלום לכל זרעו.
Thank you, Adina. And finally, we have Rabbi Bruce Benson of Port St. Lucie.
You're on mute, Bruce. You're on mute.
How's that? Am I okay now?
Good to go. Good to go.
Okay. In our brief remaining moments, I'd like to throw together a couple of facts, a couple of thoughts. First, I'd like to thank specifically Michael Bernholtz and Rabbi Haas and Cantor Sarah Keel for putting this whole thing together. It was an insane task, and they are to be commended for having done it. I look forward to more of these. But in our remaining moments, I want to just throw out some ideas, thoughts, facts that are in no particular sequence. If you have a pen, 500 men of Shushan, 10 sons of Haman, 300 more men of Shushan, 75,000 throughout the country, because Jews and freedom sometimes don't work together so well. Give or take a few. That's according to a mythological story that we created to make ourselves, on some levels, feel good. Killed 75,810 people. It's a lot of folks to celebrate getting drunk and some freedom. Second, as Rabbi Haas reminded us before, that year-long beauty pageant thing. The women couldn't have been happy being sequestered, but if they weren't happy, how did the single men in that country feel? They had to be on a tear. They had to be willing to attack anything in terms of a problem. So it brings me to the question of, so why did the rabbis consider the book of Esther to be a comedy? Which clearly it is. But let's add these things to the list and see what we come up with. Esther uses sex to manipulate, in possibility, a king, a male who is a fool. We all know that about him. We know that this book is not even mentioned in the Bible, it's added on later. We observe this festival as a carnival in many ways, masks, games, frivolity, dancing, drinking, which is fine. I mean, it's supposed to be a fun holiday, but just tuck that away for a second. According to a source no less important than the Talmud, it does state that we are so drunk, we can't tell the difference between the phrases, cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai. That's from the Talmud. The good news is it doesn't tell us what we should drink or what we shouldn't, but that we should be that drunk. We talked about not only is the book of Esther not mentioned in the Bible, neither in the book of Esther is the name of God? Nope, not even once. God to the side. As a historical aside, we know that not one word of the book of Esther is actually found amongst the myriad scrolls found at Qumran, the site of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There is no mention whatsoever of any of this stuff. Nothing relating to what has been talked about leading up to this conclusion. So what does this teach us about our self-reflective mythology? Because even with all the attempts to make it about something real, we know it's mythological. We know we created the story. It's a feel-good story for us. And there you go. So what have we learned? First, God and good always win out in the end, at least according to our visioning of how it goes. We always win somehow. But although we survive in the end and Mordecai, the good, replaces, what's his name, the bad, there intriguingly is only one person with a steady hand on ethical boundaries in the entire story, and that's the one person we ignore and can't wait to get rid of first, which is Vashti. Vashti, in the story, ultimately is the only one with an ethical barometer better than a toaster. The king wants to humiliate her and use her for his own purposes, and she just goes, I don't think so. She risks her death to stand up for her ethical and moral values. And as this is a comedy, we have no expectation, and that expectation is met, that nobody else in the story goes through the story unscathed with a moral barometer. Vashti risks death, and obviously the king is not a complete psychotic, and he just banishes her and tells her to get away. Everybody else in the story is afraid he's going to pick up the royal scepter and they're going to die. So at some point, we probably owe Vashti a round of applause, but not right now. Now, in conclusion, evidently, this proves the huge statement that it is okay to do so many things badly, whether they are real, whether we imagine them, however they come about, but the winner always gets to tell the story the way they want. History, for the most part, is written, as we know, by the winners and the story. My question for all of us is, why did the writers of this Jewish story choose something so extraordinarily contrary to everything that we believe about who we are? Don't get me wrong. I like the Purim Carnival. I like the Purim spiels. They're all fun. But I do wonder, having the pen and the tablet to write a story, even one that is tongue-in-cheek and that we can have a good chuckle and a laugh and a boo-hoo-hoo about, why didn't some of us look a little bit better in this story? But that's for next year's gathering, and this is going on pretty late, and so I'm going to yield back the balance of my time to the chair with a final statement that, with thanks to our personal Kermit, may the farce be with you.
Michael, and you're on mute as well.
What was that, Rob?
I just said you were on mute.
I should be unmuted.
You
So
are now.
a big, big, big thank you to everyone, to all of our rabbis, to all of our readers and chanters, to all of you for joining us. This was a rather incredible experiment. We had at our height between 50 and 60 log on. So think about that from all across of our different communities. I know there were people in person in some of our congregational buildings. And I look forward for other opportunities to be able to collaborate with each other. There will be a collaborative program at the counting of the Omer to have a debate about what is the most important Jewish ritual. There will also be a huge small congregation sponsored Tikkun Leil Shavuot, all on Zoom, that we've had for the last few years. So there are lots of more opportunities to do these kinds of collaboration. So a big thank you to my colleagues. A big thank you to all of you who have come out to enjoy this Purim, and a big Chag Purim Sameach, a big happy Purim to everyone. And thank you for all of that incredible booing. What a way to smile watching all of those creative ways to blot out the name of Haman. Got one last one. Thank you, everybody, and good night.